And welcome back to the show. Born and raised into activism, our first guest is a trailblazing social justice leader, a movement strategist, and a nationally recognized civil rights activist. Drawn from a lifetime of frontline culture shifting advocacy, organizing, and fighting for equal justice, her book, State of Emergency, makes a demand for change and shares the keys to effective activism, both for those new and to those longtime committed to the defense of Black lives. Joining us now to provide their point of view is I'm joined by activist, co-founder of Until Freedom, author of State of Emergency, How We Win in the Country We Built, my sister, Tamika Mallory. And I say my sister, what's happening?
Absolutely, my brother. It's so good to see you, Daren. I'm happy to be back with you. It's been a while since I've been on. And I'm just so proud of how you kept this going and really have been such a critical voice as it relates to social justice, not just in the Bronx, but I see your clips moving around social media. So you're actually impacting people all over the country.
Well, thank you. Trying to keep the fire burning as you. But it's about you today. So talk to me about where we are today, because honestly, when we think about what's happened, and I'll start off with, the Daren Chauvin case, we saw a guilty verdict. And as I've said in many circles, that was nothing more than a result of direct activism and activism that would not back down. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it was a combination between activism and, of course, a video that was so gruesome that even those who may have wanted to side with law enforcement knew that they could not. And I know that it's important for us to say that we cannot be video activists. We can't be a video movement where you have to see someone being murdered in the way that George Floyd was murdered in order for there to be real outrage, if you will. We have to make sure that whether there's a video or not, that we're on the front lines. And I do agree with you that much of the energy that we saw, the energy that we saw all across the country, not just for George Floyd, but just from Ahmaud Arbery to George Floyd, I think people were so active and outraged and the streets were so hot that it ultimately influenced in many ways the hearts and minds of those who sat in that courtroom, knowing that this isn't just an isolated incident. While they had to judge it in that way, still they knew that this is a part of a larger problem with white supremacy and police abuse in this country. And so certainly, I think activism was at the heart of how we saw that small amount of accountability for Derek Chauvin.
How do you see the climate right now? I mean, given the fact that you've been on the front lines for a long time, we've been talking about we can just take the whole time up just naming names of people who've actually been affected by gun violence, police brutality, the whole 9 yards, civil rights violations. How do you see the climate now as opposed to when you first got into into activism?
I think there are many more people who are at the table that weren't there years ago. In many ways, the movement was sort of a conversation that a lot of people did not want to get into, and even Black folks. I think you know what I'm talking about when I say that there were some of us we were the only voices out there. Some of our leaders were out there really pushing as hard as possible and not necessarily getting the support that they need. Today, we're seeing a change in that. We're seeing that more people are coming to the work, more people are concerned, and folks from different backgrounds are beginning to take this movement on as their own. We've always had, of course, white folks who supported the movement. Obviously, they supported Dr. King, they supported Reverend Jackson, they supported, Reverend Sharpton. But I think today we're seeing them come in droves. And we're seeing people begin to go, and I talk about it in the book, from allies, which are people who can kind of step in and out, they can turn it off and on, and they're starting to turn into accomplices, which means that they're making themselves more uncomfortable and they are unwilling to allow people, even in their own families, to continue to perpetuate stereotypes and discrimination against other communities. They're standing up and they're speaking out. And so I think that's what is different today than it was in the times of the past. I guess when I started 25 years ago.
Mhm. Talk to me about the book. I mean, you brought it up. I was going to ask another question about allies. I'll get to that in a minute. But talk to me about the book. What was behind the book, and when did you decide, okay, hey, it's time to write now?
Well, after George Floyd was killed, I was in Minneapolis and I made a speech that was just really from my heart. And days later, it was super, super duper viral. In fact, it was viral the same day. And a lot of people contacted me asking, they wanted to know more about what I said. They wanted me to come and speak on different platforms. I was finding myself on Zooms for 9 and 10 hours straight throughout the day, just trying to recall and explain. And I learned that there were things that I didn't even know. I knew the overall history, and I knew that that this wasn't a problem that started with George Floyd being killed, and it also wasn't a problem that started with Donald Trump. And since I knew that, I even wanted to work harder and get deeper into my understanding. And so I started writing. Within a few months after my speech, I had a few agents contact me. We had a deal with Charlemagne the God. It's his first book that was released on his new imprint called Black Privilege Publishing. And it's historic in nature that it's a Black publisher working alongside me and having my book to be the first book that he would choose to put out into the world. Pretty incredible. And so I started writing, researching, and just really doing the work to pour all the components of that speech and other things that are important into this book, which I have with me, and we'll have to make sure you all see it. And I worked, and it was a real intentional and short, aggressive timeline to get it done.
Yeah. Talk to me about some of the contents in the book. You talked just a little bit about allies just a minute ago.
Yeah.
It seems as that, and I think about the work, and I think about, how long we've been in the work in the trenches, but it seems as though now there's the most in terms of allies support that we've ever seen. People publicly now supporting. Maybe it's because everybody was home during COVID,
Sure.
and you can't deny it. But the fact of the matter is, what we are seeing are more and more allies of white and people who are not of color come along. What's that like for you? And what's the message they still need to send?
So, as I said, it's a good thing that people are getting involved. It's a great thing that folks are investing their money, their time, their resources in these movements. And it's needed, obviously. It's very important that grassroots organizers have the support of a diverse and wide range of folks. And so that's an important piece, but there's still so much work to be done. You know that. And my book, when you talk about what is in it, of course, the comparison between allies and accomplices is there. I talk about the model of centralized leadership, which is what we are used to traditionally in the movement, and Ella Baker's model of decentralized leadership and how we should be somewhere in the middle. I talk about people who need to be doing work on the inside before they go run to movements and try to lead outside. They have to actually work on their families, work on their own biases, work on some of the issues that they possess or that they are around every day. And that's hard work, but it's the most important work. And then, of course, my forward is a conversation between Cardi B and Dr. Angela Davis. There are many people, not many, but there have been some who were confused. Well, why would you put those two people together? Some folks didn't feel like Cardi B has the experience, if you will, or the authority to speak in a racial justice book. I disagree. I reject that. I think we all have to be a part of this movement in this moment. I think we all have a responsibility to be at the table, no matter where you come from. And so I was intentional about making sure that they were in the top of the book, so that Ray Ray on the street corner, Keisha, who might be in a club at night, the pastor, the janitor, a mother and her teenage son, that everyone would pick up the book and see themselves in the text and be able to find where's their role. What more can they do? How can they encourage others? And so, I definitely am one who lives in the cross section of the Cardi B cultural world. And of course, Dr. Davis being a super, super duper icon thought leader. And I thought that it was important to bring them two together. So again, as folks are going through it, they can say, well, I'm picking it up for the forward because I see two incredible people, but I'm going to stay for the rest of the content.
Right. You spent a lot of time with the Reverend Al Sharpton, Harry Belafonte. You talk, tremendously about the influence and the impact that they've had. How much have these people actually shaped and molded the person that you are today?
Oh, so much. I mean, obviously Reverend Sharpton poured a great deal into me. My leadership today has a lot to do with his leadership and his acknowledgement, and sort of he acknowledged and also identified within me that I was a leader and that I had the ability to go out and to organize and to do the work. And so I learned much of my organizing skills from National Action Network. And I think, I can never thank him enough for what he did. And of course, once I was in the next phase of my life, as I started to recognize my own power, I sat at the feet of Harry Belafonte and learned so much about many of the things that he saw and what he understands to be some of the issues that we need to work on today interpersonally within movements, looking at strategies. We've had those conversations, and he also is such a powerful and just a sweet person who really does add so much value to the movement. I can see why he was so important to Dr. King. And so I have, been able to learn a lot from him. And then, of course, Dr. Hazel N. Dukes, the Dukes lady, Ma Dukes, she's incredible and has been a mentor to me. And there's so many others. I think about Marion Barry's wife, the late, great Marion Barry, mayor of Washington, D.C. And his wife, Cora Masters Barry, has been a consistent in my life. And has been with me through some really hard troubles. And so, there's a wide array of individuals that have helped to make up the Tamika Mallory that you all see today. And, certainly young people are a part of that, because from my son to all the other young people that I organize with, every day I'm being encouraged. Every day I'm learning about even how to be more courageous, and they push me to be bolder. And so, there's a lot of seasoning in this sauce. It's not just me. And, of course, my faith leads me. So my pastor, W. Franklin Richardson, is one who spiritually grounds me. And I don't know where I would be if I didn't have all of those individuals and more. Of course, my family to help me to keep sane and also to see the world from different perspectives.
Right. Talk to me about being uprooted, if you will. Talk about being grounded. Criticism, activism comes with criticism.
Sure.
And I think that probably looking at your career, you probably experienced the most criticism over the last few years that you've ever had in your whole journey. Talk to us about what the criticism has done for you and actually what it's done to you.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where it's coming from. There's some people, if a mom, has the wrong impression of me and my work and what what my intentions are, my integrity, that hurts, and I've tried to make sure that I check in with other moms that I've worked with. And, what I know is that the people who actually know me, people who have met me, people who have worked with me, they don't feel that I lack integrity or that I'm exploiting families. They know that they contacted me or that I got involved at a time that was very, very sensitive, and very detrimental to them. And in some way, shape, or form, I added value. I helped, and I haven't left their side. When I think about the Bronx, Cheyenne Norman, the mother of 4-year-old Christopher Lloyd Morgan Jr., shot on a playground in the summertime. And I helped to bury this young man and was also very involved in the anti-violence movement that is everlasting in New York City with Erica Ford and A.T. Mitchell. So there's a connection, of course, from the incident of a 4-year-old baby being killed all the way to the policy work and the community work that I've been engaged in and have been one of the leaders in terms of organizing. And I'm still with her. I just saw Cheyenne at a conference where Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon Martin's mother, holds an event where mothers come together, too many mothers, probably 200 of women who've lost their children in violent incidents, coming together to be in space for healing. And Cheyenne was there. I made sure that she got invited. So I never leave these individuals. I try to stay with them and they stay with me. They encourage me. Nicole Bell, Sean Bell's wife, she encourages me. And there's so many, the names and the lists unfortunately go on and on. And I'm not there to help everyone because I'm only one person. But when I have been, I know that I have added some value to their struggle. And there are other people that are just haters, and that's life. You're going to have that. As we know, the song says, if you ain't got no haters, you ain't popping. So I have several, and sometimes they say things that are important. It's a good critique that I can take and use to tweak some of my, activities and the way in which I operate. But for the most part, I try to keep myself safe from those who are looking to tear me down, because when these families call, they don't want a broken person that's as broken as they are. They don't want someone who's insecure. They need someone who's strong and powerful. And I have to work with those who actually support me. And there are so many out there. There are many people with me, much more than those who are against me.
Has the criticism ever got to a place where it actually broke you down to the place where you couldn't go and be of assistance to a family?
No, not necessarily. No, that hasn't happened to me. I've continued to work through it all. I think the Women's March was an experience that broke me. It hurt a lot, what I went through. And I think I underestimated the unfortunate backlash, if you will, or the circumstances of being a Black woman in a space full of white women who had not done the work. They were just upset about Donald Trump, but they hadn't done any real work. They didn't really have a racial analysis, and they definitely didn't understand how harmful their behavioral patterns can be to Black women and to other women of color. So that was an instance when I was broken, and I experienced a lot. And I think it probably was trauma even before that. And I finally had a breakdown right after the Women's March. But no, I don't allow the criticism to stop me from doing my work. It doesn't mean that I won't take time off to clear my head. It doesn't mean that I won't look at a city or a place and say, well, if there's folks there that have said they don't want us to be involved, then, God bless you, and we keep moving. Because unfortunately, there's enough work that is happening across this country and enough outrage that we don't have to go into particular places and work with families that don't want us there. I've not had a family ever say, I don't want to work with you. That's not been my experience. And so, no, I don't allow it to stop me. In fact, I'm learning as I'm now 40, going towards 41 years old, to use it as fuel to keep pushing.
Talk to me about police. We got a few minutes left. I want to talk about police. We've heard the conversation about defund the police. Some people say that's not the right terminology, but give us your take on how it should play out and police reform.
So I think it's real simple, and people understand it. There are some folks who don't want to understand it because it feels really, you feel nervous about challenging police departments. The unions have you thinking everybody is crazy, and the media oftentimes mischaracterizes what the defund police movement is about. I am an abolitionist, and I want to see a day where we don't need police with guns in our community. But that's not what we're talking about in this moment. We're talking about creating balance. If you think about New York City alone, the budget for police is between $6 and $10 billion. $6 and $10 billion spent on policing, and public safety in New York. But if you just combine the budgets of the health department, education, housing, and some of the very important institutions that we as Black and brown people have to use, and where we find ourselves caught up. If you put those budgets together, the number combined does not equal the $6 to $10 billion that's being spent on policing. Mm-hmm. And we have an issue with mental health, where you need mental health services in general. People need clean food. People need housing. I believe that when you provide those services, you have less need for police to be in communities having to even come into contact, especially with our young Black men and, of course, young Black women as well. And so what we're talking about is creating balance. We're saying that police officers do not need to be militarized to the point that they are using military tactics against protesters and in communities, especially communities that are already traumatized. So we're saying, let's take some of the money from police budgets and apply it to very important institutional support that we need in our communities. It's not a difficult conversation. It's very simple. And if you know anything about the crisis management system, which I spoke about, Erica Ford, A.T. Mitchell, Shanduke McFadden, and the list goes on, Ife Charles, so many who are working within a system in New York City that deals with addressing violence from the perspective of a holistic perspective. And we know that right before COVID, obviously COVID has created new circumstances. COVID has created violence everywhere. But before COVID, if you look at the data for the crisis management system in their encatchment areas, places where they exist, where they're doing work, violence is down. The number of violent incidents have reduced significantly because they're providing services. So again, it's a simple model, but it is one that's pushed back on because, one, we've been taught that the first number you call if someone in your household is having a breakdown is 911. We want to change that. We want to change that thinking. But the other thing is that the police unions, they have a tight hold on our elected officials, and there is not political courage out there in some instances to really work and fight back against them. I do appreciate that the city council in New York City passed ending qualified immunity. But when they sent the bill to Mayor de Blasio, and he's supposed to sign all the stuff that comes out of the city budget and the city's decision making, he did not send ending qualified immunity back signed. And so we're always fighting the layers because unfortunately, all of our people are not on the same page, even when they're Democrats who are supposed to be working with us.
Yeah. Got only a couple minutes left. I want you to tell us really quickly about the podcast, how people check you out.
Yeah, sure. So Street Politicians is our podcast. We love our podcast. It's our baby. It's the thing that we get to go to and talk our stuff and have our guests and many of our friends on. It is called Street Politicians. It can be found a new episode every Wednesday on iHeartRadio, on their app. Anywhere else that you can download podcasts, we're there. And you can see the visuals on iWoman TV. We are on YouTube. It's iWoman.tv. And check us out. Street Politicians is dope. You know, my homeboy and partner in everything, my son Lennon, my son the General, he is my co-host on the show. And we get into a whole lot of debate because he and I hardly ever agree on anything. I appreciate you so much for having me on. I've got to run to my next engagement, but I so much appreciate you. Thank you for keeping up with me for so many years.
Hey, my sister, always glad to have you here on the Social Justice Forums. Go do your thing. I'll talk to you later on. Listen, we got more shows. Stay with us. Social Justice will continue right after this.